Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsurayah tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatra sargo mrisha dhamna svena sada nirastakohakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation made of threefold gunas appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad amritadrava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahma Rishi. Go on drinking the sweet nectar day after day. So now we are entering the third chapter of the fourth Skandha of Bhagavatam. We are in the middle of this beautiful Daksha Yajna and the teachings that come out of it from Lord Shiva. So we saw in the previous chapter that Daksha did a sacrifice and he disrespected and insulted Shiva, and Shiva's attendants, headed by Nandishvara, became angry and cursed Daksha, while Shiva himself remained silent, unmoved in his own being, and left silently. Now we continue that Shiva, after having left, Daksha continued in his own ways, and some time passed, and Daksha was meanwhile made into the chief of all Prajapatis. Prajapatis are the lords of created beings. As we saw, Daksha had 16 daughters, and they were all married to different beings, and they procreated, and thereby Daksha became the head of all created beings as appointed by Brahma, and therefore he got puffed up with more pride. All this happens, as it is said, with many stories too, even in the case of Ravana, in the case of Hiranyakashipu. They're all first given taste of great material success, and their pride gets even more puffed up, and then finally they face the lesson of how all that is temporary, and that's exactly what Daksha is going through. Daksha is right now puffed up with pride, and so he performed a very great yajna sacrifice called Vajapeya. This is a very famous sacrifice that is hardly done these days, but it was very famous, and that's why the last name Vajpayee is very common and well known in India. So, because the ones who are proficient in Vajapeya sacrifice are called Vajpayee. So, this Vajapeya sacrifice Daksha did, and he further insulted the Pandits, the great scholars, when doing the sacrifice. So, he was more and more digging his grave, as it were. And then finally, he came to what is called the most supreme yajna, greatest of all yajnas, called Brihaspati Seva. And Brihaspati Seva, these are yajnas, by the way, which are pretty much not done. Vajapeya, Brihaspati Seva, these are very rarely done, because it is said in this day and age, the arrangements are not conducive. The paraphernalia necessary, the time and space necessary, none of that is available, and that is why it is said that in this day and age, the best yajna is simply to glorify the Supreme Being. It's called as Harinama Sankirtana Yajna, and this yajna, the greatest yajna of all, is to glorify the Supreme Being and to abide in Him, and that supersedes all these yajnas that are there in the Vedas. In any case, Daksha wanted to do this greatest of all yajnas in the Vedas called Brihaspati Sava, and therefore he invited everyone. He invited all the sages, all the various devatas, that is the demigods, the deities, and all their consorts. Everyone was invited except, of course, Lord Shiva. The same reason why he insulted Shiva in the previous sacrifice, now he insulted further by not even inviting him. But Sati, the daughter of Daksha and the wife of Lord Shiva, was seeing that these arrangements were being made because this was a very massive, grand sacrifice, yajna, Brihaspati Sava, being done by Daksha. So everybody was talking about it. All the devatas, as we said, were going, all the rishis were going. So the air, as it were, was filled with the news of this yajna being done, and Sati, being the daughter of Daksha, was somehow drawn to attending this even though her husband was not invited. So here we see that Sati, who later becomes Parvati, as we already mentioned, Sati is also put into some kind of an ignorance in order to bring out the story. Sati, who is the consort of Shiva and who is the Devi, is temporarily put into a certain mode of ignorance in order for the Leela to go forth. This happens in many instances. For instance, in the great Ramayana, there is a brief instance where Sita, Mother Sita herself, is put into ignorance when the golden deer comes in the forest and she gets attracted to it, and that results in the whole episode of Ram having to leave her even though he first warns her, but she wouldn't listen, and because of that he has to go behind the deer and Ravana kidnaps her. So similarly, Sati here also is put into a similar ignorance, and temporarily again, in order for the Leela of Shiva to come forth, just as Sita's ignorance was necessary for the Leela of Ram to unfold. So here Sati is drawn, therefore, to attend the yajna even though she is not supposed to attend, because her husband was not invited, she was also not invited, and yet she was drawn to this, and she saw all the various demigods with their charming spouses dressed nicely and in fine costumes and everyone going. So it's like how we can see some grand party happening in the town, and all the celebrities, all the well known people are all invited, and therefore the one who is not invited seems like they are left out, especially because she is directly related to the one who is organizing this divine party. And so she thinks, my own father is doing this, all the great beings are all invited, everybody is going, and so she gets deluded into thinking she needs to go as well, even though she is not invited. So she speaks to Lord Shiva as follows. She says, I'm hearing that there is a grand sacrificial festival that is being conducted by my father, Daksha. So she says, shall we go there? And you know that when it comes to father or immediate family, we don't even need a formal invite. We can go there uninvited because he is my own father and he is doing this. And as you know, my sisters will all attend it because, as we saw, Daksha had 16 daughters. So all her 15 other sisters, she says all of them will attend with their husband. And also my mother will be there. And she also says my mother hasn't seen me for a long time. And so it'll be wonderful to see my mother. She will see me with so much affection. And my heart has also been yearning to see her. So all of this kind of attachment is, again, as we said, the temporary delusion to which Sati is put through, because this attachment to this is exactly what the worldly folks go through. They are drawn to seeing their immediate relation out of a sense of attachment, and even if it's not appropriate, they want to go there. And so on. So that's exactly what Sati is expressing here, that I'm yearning to see my mother. But she says that I know that she is partially aware that she's ignorant and she is caught in delusion. So she says, I long to see my native place, my place of birth, even though it may not be the right thing to do. And she says, undoubtedly, you are the supreme being. So she recognizes even this moment that Shiva, being the supreme being, and her place is to be next to him, and yet she is drawn. So she says, Tvayet etad ascharyam aja atmamayaya vinirmitam bhati gunatrayatmakam. She says this wonderful creation is made of three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and it is brought forth by your own maya. So she says, Shiva being non-different from the supreme being, the whole universe made of three gunas comes from the supreme being, and therefore she addresses Shiva, who is the supreme being, as you are the one from whom the whole universe has come forth. You are the abode of all the three gunas, and yet I am now ignorant and I long to see my birthplace. And you please see, my lord, all the women are all dressed nicely and going in the over the aerial route to see this. So please be kind to me, O Lord, with a dark spot in the throat, she says. So this refers to an incident. That's why Shiva is called Manikantha or Neelakantha, because his throat holds the poison that came from the churning of the milk ocean. So this is a story that will come later in Bhagavatam in detail, where when the milk ocean is churned, first poison comes out, and the only one who is capable of taking the poison is Shiva. So he takes the poison and it's held in his very throat. And this is very symbolic to the story. We'll see later. The churning of the milk ocean is nothing but the churning of the mind in meditation. And when the churning of the mind happens, first all the evil tendencies come forth, which is the poison, and they have to be surrendered unto Shiva, the Supreme Being. And once it is surrendered, then the nectar, which is the abidance in the truth, in peace, in love, comes forth. So that's the inner meaning of that story in brief. So when the poison comes forth, Shiva takes it in his throat and holds it out of compassion. That's why he is called as Neelakantha. So Sati here refers to that and says, "O Lord, with a dark spot in your throat due to consuming poison out of compassion, please allow me to attend this great sacrifice of my father. How can a daughter remain unmoved on hearing a grand festivity happening at the house of her parents?" So, this is the typical attitude of worldly women and men that is given voice to by Sati. She says people go to the house of their husband or parents or near and dear ones, even uninvited. So, similarly, even though we are not invited, we should go. Be pleased to grant this desire of mine. She says, you have given me half of your body. So she refers to the form of Shiva as Ardhanarishwara, where Shiva gave her the left half of her body, which is also highly symbolic. And this union of masculine and feminine, represented by Ardhanarishwara, of course, represents the whole principle of creation, the yin and yang, and that's why Shiva gives the left half of his body to his consort. So Sati refers to this and says, I am given the honor of being your left half by you. You are so compassionate, so please grant me this desire too of attending the sacrifice of my father. So just as it's very uncanny, the parallel between this incident and what Sita does in Ramayana, as we said, how Sita got deluded and insisted on getting that golden deer, even though Ram warned her against it. Similarly, here too, Sati insists on going to this part celebration, this sacrifice done by her father, even though Shiva will warn against it, as we see now. So Shiva listens to his wife and he smiles, and he, of course, knows that it is not appropriate for them to go to this yajna being uninvited. So he speaks, and Bhagavatam says, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. This is significant because the word Bhagavan refers to the Supreme Being, and in Bhagavatam, everywhere only when the Supreme Being in his avatar, as we saw when Kapila spoke as the avatar of Vasudeva, or when Krishna speaks, when the Supreme Being in his avatar speaks, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha comes, whereas all other deities, including Brahma, always are referred to as Brahma Uvacha or so on. But only for Shiva here, it says the same, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. So Bhagavatam thereby makes it clear that Shiva is non-different from Vasudeva. And this is very important because many who see difference are caught in, again, a fragmented idea of divinity. All there is one truth, and that is Vasudeva, and that is Shiva. So Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, here Shiva, the Lord says, he says, O good lady, people indeed go to their relations uninvited, this is true, but it can be possible, or it can be right only when the people who are doing this, the ones who are holding any celebration or festival, their mind is not tainted with malice and arrogance, which is exactly the case with Daksha. Daksha is, rather to the contrary, completely tainted with malice and arrogance, and he has anger due to self identification with his body. So he thinks of himself as the body, as the individual, and therefore he has pride and arrogance. And he says his pride is heightened by all the qualities he has got. So there are 6 qualities Shiva lists here, which are very good for noble souls, but which also for those who are already caught in ego only puffs up their ego and makes them arrogant. These 6 qualities are learning, austerity, opulence, charming personality, youth, and good lineage. So it says Vidya Tapo Vitta Vapur Vaya Kulaihi. So Vidya is learning, Tapo is austerity, Vitta is wealth or opulence, Vapu is charming look, Vaya is youth, and Kula is good lineage and pedigree. So these 6 are good for good embellishments for noble people, but it is also a curse for the wicked. The same 6 qualities becomes a curse because with all of these, their ego gets puffed up, their judgment is clouded, and they fail to perceive the glory of the Supreme Being, thinking that these qualities belong to them as the individual. So Shiva says one should never visit the house of such people whose judgment is unsteady and who view everyone with a suspicious mind and with anger. So these are very important instructions given by Shiva, not just to Sati, but to all of us on how to deal with people of the world. When people are inviting, it's good to not be indiscriminate and go to wherever we are invited, even, let alone to places we are not invited, but to be very careful in where we go, because Shiva says those people who are puffed up with pride, whose judgment is unsteady, whose mind is suspicious, and who have anger, such people, their houses, even if they hold the greatest events, we ought not to go. Shiva says here that even if one is hit with arrows, with with uh, wounds that are caused by the arrows that are piercing the body, that torture is nothing compared to the abuse of people with a very evil and malignant mind. Because he says, to make the point further, he says, even if one is pierced with arrows and has many bodily wounds, they can get some treatment and sleep peacefully. Whereas the one who is abused by words, there is no treatment for it, and they will have heartache day and night, and they cannot even get sleep. So it is worse to be abused by evil people than to even be hit with arrows on the body. Therefore, Shiva says one ought not to go to places where there will be disrespect, where there are egoic people with pride who are engaged in showing off their wealth and fame and learning, even. And such places will only lead to encountering those with unsteady judgment, with anger, and with all negative qualities, which will result in getting abused. So Shiva then says, "You are indeed a beloved daughter of Daksha, but know right now that you will not receive proper attention there, because being my consort, you will not be respected. Your own father will not give you the proper respect, because his heart is burning with jealousy, and he is troubled at the even the sight of those exalted beings who are situated in jnana." So Shiva here beautifully says, those who are standing as witness to their own mind. So this is the essence of those who are true sages. Daksha has envy towards them. See, instead of glorifying and revering the sages who are completely dissociated from their body and mind and who remain as pure witness, he is actually filled with envy. He says, Shiva says, Papachyamanena hrida turendriyaha samriddhibihi purusha buddhi sakshinam. So the Buddha's buddhi sakshina means one who is remaining as the sakshi, the witness to the intellect and the mind. Shiva here describes the nature of a true sage or a true enlightened being. And he says such enlightened beings ought to be revered and respected, but instead your father is only having envy and anger towards them, unable to even recognize the supreme heights of such beings, and he simply hates them, just as the demons hate Sri Hari. So he says, Padam param dveshti yata asura harim. Just as the asuras, the demons, hate Hari, the Supreme Lord, similarly, people like your father who are caught in their ego hate the enlightened beings. And then Shiva continues and says, you may know that I was not rising up. So this was the source of the whole insulting of Daksha, because when Daksha entered the assembly hall in the previous yajna, Shiva did not rise up from his seat, and Daksha got insulted and he hurled abuses in a very mean way. But Shiva says here that I mentally respect only the Supreme Being dwelling in every heart. So, this is again an instruction for everyone. Shiva says it is not good to offer respect to people who are caught in their ego. So, normally people indiscriminately even touch the feet of people who are simply famous or powerful or wealthy, and that is exactly the wrong thing to do, and that's exactly what Daksha was expecting because he was wealthy and powerful. Shiva says that the wise only mentally respect the supreme being dwelling in the heart, and not those who regard their body as their self. So this is the very definition of people who are caught in their ego with political power or money, muscle, and all the rest. And such people ought not to be respected by standing up and falling at their feet and so on. But one has to only mentally, even when we meet such people, in their very heart abides the Supreme Being. So one can mentally respect the Supreme Being abiding in their hearts while not giving them any external respect, because their mind and their body are caught in egoic arrogance and so on. So Shiva says this is the reason why, though mentally respecting the Supreme Being dwelling in every heart, including the heart of your father, I did not rise up or give any respect to him. And he explains further in a very beautiful verse. He says, because it is the pure mind that is called as Vasudeva. The meaning of the word Vasudeva is pure mind, and in a pure mind arises Vasudeva. So this is the symbolism behind the father Vasudeva giving birth to the supreme being Krishna as Vasudeva. When Krishna appears on earth, his father is Vasudeva, and he gives birth to Vasudeva. And the inner meaning of that is also that Vasudeva represents a pure mind, and in the pure mind is born the realization of Vasudeva. So he says, Sattvam Vishuddham Vasudeva Shabditam Yadiyate Tatra Puman Apavritah Sattve cha Tasmin Bhagavan Vasudevo Hi Adhokshajo Me Namasa Vidhiyate. So Sattvam Vishuddham Vasudeva Shabditam, pure Sattva, goodness, is the essence of the word Vasudeva, and in that, Tasmin Bhagavan Vasudevo Hi Adhokshajo Me Namasa Vidhiyate. In that, Bhagavan Vasudeva, who is Adhokshaja, the one beyond all senses, is realized, and that I offer obeisance to. Therefore, you should never look at the face of Daksha, even though he is your father, nor those who are devoted to him. So as we see in this world too, people who are very powerful, they think they are almost like God, and there are people who are sycophants who are worshipping them literally, and they are surrounded by such people, and this is what happens to Daksha here. And so Shiva wants that you ought not to even look at the face of Daksha or to those who are devoted to him, because he bears ill will to sages and he bears ill will to me. And then he finally says, as a warning, if you ignore all this advice and go there, nothing good will come to you. Because when a man who is held in high esteem suffers indignity at the hands of a relation, that is equal to death. So when someone who is held in high esteem by the whole world, the sages or the supreme being Shiva, he is being insulted, then such insult will only cause destruction to the one who insults. And if one visits such people, giving them respect, as Sati wants to go and visit because of her attachment as her father, this will cause death to her too. So this is what Shiva wants here. And with this great teaching of what is the right conduct in terms of dealing with worldly people, and also the warning to Sati, this chapter ends. We will see what Sati does after listening to this warning and what ensues out of that in the next chapters. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.